Good morning, you're watching Daybreak live on A News and I'm your host Nadia Jani, taking you through today's top stories throughout the morning. Now let's take a look at the key headlines. US President Donald Trump delivers State of Union address highlighting immigration, economy and foreign policy. The UK government has agreed to release files related to the appointment of former Prince Andrew as trade envoy in 2001. And at least 25 people have died in heavy floods and landslides in Brazil. Now let's take a look at the key story shaping the day across the globe. And we head first to the BBC website in relation to Brazil, and floods and landslides in Brazil kill at least 25 people. Now this information came up over the last day in regards to a number of people, as I said, 25 had died in the southeastern Brazilian state of Minas Gerais after heavy rains on Monday evening caused flooding and several landslides. Now, most of these deaths were reported in the city of Juiz de Fora, officials say, and say 18 people were killed while another 7 deaths were reported in Uba. Rescue operations are ongoing, and the Brazilian president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, sent his deepest condolences to the families of the victims and those who lost their homes in the floods. He also added that the government would act with speed and force this moment requires. Now, these images, as you can see, of the landslides coming down here, quite impactful due to the heavy rains on a hill above the Juiz de Fora, also known as Morro do Cristo. So we know that there's a number of things coming to light. We will give you an update in regards to whether or not the death toll rises, but right now a number of search and rescue operations are released in this area to hope they can find more people who are missing due to the heavy flooding in this area. Right, we now move to our next headline, and that's on CNN, and that's in regards to Canada. Canada plans to assist Cuba as Washington squeezes the island. Now, what we know is that Canada said it planned to provide assistance to Cuba while the island grapples with fuel shortages after Washington moved to choke off Cuba's oil supplies. We know that Cuba is currently very much struggling at the moment. We've reported that there's not been availability to collect rubbish, so rubbish has piled up because of the lack of fuel to fuel the actual rubbish trucks to take them away. So we know that the US President Donald Trump administration has moved to block all oil from reaching Cuba. And one of Cuba's key oil importers were Venezuela and Mexico. Venezuela, we know, is currently under the guise of the Trump administration as well as the interim president. And we know that the Trump administration has put pressure on Mexico, who's also decided to suspend its exports to Cuba, which is also making it very difficult for the citizens there. So that's a number of things that is pushing up prices for food and transportation and prompting severe fuel shortages and hours of blackouts in the country. Now, the Canadian Foreign Minister has said that they are preparing to plan to assist the country. They say that they're not prepared at this point to provide any further details on what that will look like, but said they are looking into it. Now, the UN has warned that if Cuba's energy needs are not met, it could actually lead to a cause of a larger humanitarian crisis in the country. So we'll see exactly how this continues, but we do know that the US administration is very heavy-handed in regards to Cuba and wants a change of government, saying that it's a failed country. But we'll give you more information as this progresses. We now turn to our next headline, which is on the Al Jazeera website in regards to Sudan. And here it states at least 28 people killed as Sudan parliamentary forces tears through Darfur. So we know that Sudan's rapid support Support Forces, the RSF parliamentary group, has carried out a major raid in North Darfur state, killing and wounding dozens of people, including 10 women. Medical personnel were also among those attacked. Now, the assault on the Mishteriya came up against a backdrop of rising tribal tensions in the western region of Darfur, where a United Nations investigation last week, if you remember, found that the RSF committed acts of genocide against non-Arab ethnic groups. Now, if we just scroll down, there's a map actually on this page that I just want to draw your attention to, because it states a number of things that has happened since the war began in April 2023. And in this map, which we're getting to in a moment, it's just right down at the bottom of the page here. It shows several things that I want to highlight and point out. And here we go. Right, so this map coming up here. Since April 2023, there have been at least 3,017 deaths related to drone attacks, most of it occurring in the North Darfur region, which you can see highlighted in the main deeper colour of red. Then also West Kordofan and North Kordofan. So these are the three main areas that drone attacks have been seen. Now, the town is also home to the Arab tribal leader Musa Hilal, who has voiced support for Sudan's government, even though he is part of a different ethnic group within that time, and he's voiced his support for the government and wanting to stop the war. Now, the war has currently killed tens of thousands of people. It's devastating and displaced 11 million people, creating the world's largest hunger and displacement crisis. So it's very important that we continue to highlight what is happening in Sudan as the war continues there. Now, we know that US pressure is also there, saying that it wants a ceasefire in this area so that the two sides can come together and work on an agreement. We will definitely keep you up to date with everything that's happening over in this part of the continent of Africa. Okay, now we move over to our next headline, and that's on The Guardian. And that's in regards to Trump's address, the State of Union address, which he made history for the first time in US history, because it was the longest. It was an hour and I believe approximately 49 minutes, which is longer than the last president, who was also, his stated as being very long, which was an hour and 29 minutes, and that was Bill Clinton's in 2001, I believe. So just some key lines in regards to this, because we do have a report, but he finished, as I mentioned, his a number of things that he wanted to highlight on the economy, on tariffs, as well as foreign and domestic policies. Now, Trump calls tariffs ruling unfortunate, but says the administration is pursuing legal alternatives and wanting to scrap a number of different things and change. He's currently put a 10% levy in. He wants that to be increased to 15% as well. There was a number of shouting from Democrats in the audience when Trump mentioned the Somali community, saying that Somali pirates ransacked Minnesota through bribery, corruption and lawlessness. And one of the Democratic congresswomen shouted out that that was a lie. Trump also attacked Democrats for not standing up and giving him an ovation as well, and said that they should be ashamed of themselves. There's a number of different things. He also spoke in relation to Iran and the talks happening, which will actually take place tomorrow in Geneva, which we will also keep you up to date with. Now, we have a detailed report as to what actually happened in Trump's State of Union address. So we'll take a look at that right now.
Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States.
US President Donald Trump focused on immigration, the economy and crime in his State of the Union address at the Capitol, as he outlined his domestic priorities while defending key foreign and economic policies. He also highlighted the closure of the US border, economic resilience and falling crime rates. Turning to foreign policy, Trump revisited last year's US strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities.
We are in negotiations with them. They want to make a deal, but we haven't heard those secret words. We will never have a nuclear weapon. My preference is to solve this problem through diplomacy. But one thing is certain, I will never allow the world's #1 sponsor of terror, which they are by far, to have a nuclear weapon. Can't let that happen.
His remarks contrast with comments earlier this week from US envoy Steve Witkoff, who said Iran could be a week away from developing a nuclear weapon. On immigration, Trump reiterated his administration's hardline approach, pointing to what he described as tightened border controls and enforcement efforts. The president again took aim at Somali Americans in Minnesota, linking immigration to fraud and rising crime.
In which millions and millions of illegal aliens poured across our borders, totally unvetted and unchecked. We now have the strongest and most secure border in American history by far. In the past 9 months, 0 illegal aliens have been admitted to the United States.
The administration has repeatedly tied both legal and irregular immigration to fraud and pressure on social services, and has moved to suspend immigrant visa processing for dozens of countries. The address comes at a politically sensitive moment for the president, as economic pressures, foreign policy tensions and legal battles converge ahead of the November midterm elections.
We'll give you more information in regards to that with our correspondent who has been in Washington there. Now we're going to take a short break, but when I return, I'll discuss the rest of the global stories. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's take a look at the global stories. The UK government has agreed to release files related to the appointment of former Prince Andrew as trade envoy in 2001. The move comes as lawmakers scrutinise his past links with US sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Today, we must begin to clean away that stain with the disinfectant of transparency.
Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, used an Opposition Day debate in the House of Commons on Tuesday to force the release of files on the former Prince Andrew's appointment as UK trade envoy in 2001.
Whether it is the President of the United States and his Commerce Secretary, or Peter Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, or Epstein himself, their victims and survivors have seen those responsible evade accountability and escape justice for far too long.
His comments come after the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor for suspicion of misconduct in public office last week. Andrew strenuously denies any wrongdoing. The UK government agreed these documents will be released after officials review them to ensure they don't jeopardise the police investigation.
We support this motion today. Frankly, it is the least we owe the victims of the horrific abuse that was perpetrated by Jeffrey Epstein and others. The abuse that was enabled, aided and abetted by a very extensive group of arrogant, entitled and often very wealthy individuals in this country and elsewhere.
Earlier this month, the House of Commons agreed to release documents on Lord Peter Mandelson's appointment as US ambassador after his links with Epstein were uncovered.
Ukraine is marking 4 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion, with a nationwide moment of silence in Kyiv and Bucha, and renewed pledges of support from European leaders.
In Kyiv, the day began quietly. Soldiers lowered military flags, traffic stopped. People stood with candles and portraits in their hands, marking time by what they have lost. 4 years on, the war remains Europe's deadliest conflict since World War II.
Putin has not achieved his goals. He has not broken Ukrainians. He has not won this war. We have preserved Ukraine, and we will do everything to secure peace and justice.
But the anniversary was not only about remembrance, it was also a message to Ukraine's allies. European Union leaders were in Kiev joining Zelensky at St. Sophia Cathedral in what officials described as a show of unity as the war enters its 5th year. At the same time, Zelensky addressed the European Parliament, urging lawmakers to back a proposed €90 billion support package over 2 years, calling it essential for Ukraine's security and resilience.
Right now, there is an important decision on the table, 90 billion euros in support for Ukraine over 2 years. This is a real financial guarantee of our security and our resilience, and it must be implemented.
European leaders had hoped to move quickly on the loan and a fresh sanctions package, but Hungary has kept its veto, exposing divisions inside the bloc at a critical moment in the war. In Kiev, leaders from the so-called Coalition of the Willing also met discussing continued military support and tougher pressure on Moscow.
We must continue to help Ukraine defend herself and not get drawn into the idea that because there are talks going on, that somehow that means that we don't have to do the hard yards of helping Ukraine to defend herself. We know that Putin is dragging his heels.
I am relatively skeptical that peace can be achieved in the short term. First, we must continue our support, and we must increase pressure on Russia, including work on the 20th package of sanctions.
Moscow, meanwhile, says the conflict has evolved into a broader confrontation with the West and insists it will continue until Russia's objectives are met.
The special military operation continues. At the same time, Russia remains open to achieving its goals through political and diplomatic means, and work in this direction is ongoing. In any case, Russia's interests will be ensured.
Diplomatic contacts between the sides are ongoing, but no agreement has been announced.
The Louvre Museum's director has resigned months after the €88 million theft of the French crown jewels. Laurence Decazes has faced increasing scrutiny over security failures, labour unrest and an alleged ticket fraud scheme at the world's most visited museum in Paris. French President Emmanuel Macron praised her decision to resign, calling it an act of responsibility. Jewellery stolen during the daytime heist in October last year included a diamond and emerald necklace given by Emperor Napoleon to his wife. For almost 2 weeks, farmers across Serbia have staged protests to call for restrictions on agriculture imports as they demand higher subsidies. The protests have led to roadblocks and are spreading across the country. Here's more.
Thousands of Serbian farmers blocked roads across the country on Tuesday, demanding stronger subsidies and protection from cheap imports. The protests have been underway for nearly 2 weeks and are spreading to additional regions, with blockades disrupting traffic on 42 main roads. Farmers are calling for temporary restrictions or tariffs on certain agricultural imports, including lower-priced foreign milk and pork, as well as faster payments under the existing support system.
The energy among the people is not decreasing because we are ready to persevere and push to the end. All the promises of these traitors who are in power, from the Minister of Agriculture to everyone else, to the shameful meeting when we, colleagues from the association, and all those who are on the blockades, went to talk with the minister. Shame. He is no longer our minister because responsibility must be taken and his replacement must come.
In response, officials said farmers had failed to attend talks aimed at discussing measures to improve the milk market. They added that some retailers had pledged to increase purchases of locally produced dairy goods. The farmers' demonstrations coincide with ongoing nationwide anti-government protests that began in 2024 after 16 people were killed in the collapse of a canopy at a railway station. Those protests continue and have shaken the rule of President Alexander Vučić.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was evacuated from his residence in Canberra on Tuesday night after a security threat. Mr. Albanese returned a few hours later after nothing suspicious was found. However, news outlet Guardian Australia was told the incident involved the threat of an explosive. Australian police gave very little detail but said that they responded to an alleged security incident and that there was no current threat to the public. At least 25 people have died in floods and landslides in Minas Gerais in Brazil, with rescue teams battling through thick mud. Dozens remain missing as communities struggle to recover.
Thick red mud and debris is hampering rescue attempts after torrential rain swept through southeastern Brazil, killing at least 25 people on Monday, triggering flooding and landslides across the state of Minas Gerais. 18 of the deaths were recorded in the city of Juiz de Fora, while a further 7 were confirmed in the nearby town of Ubar, around 110 kilometers away. Authorities say 43 people are still missing. Fire officials say the scale of the damage is hampering access to the worst affected areas.
The biggest challenge is the area, which is very large. It includes 12 residences and a large number of residents who were inside their homes because it was raining at night. So we've been gathering these people to provide the best possible assistance, but the amount of mud is enormous. Therefore, we've been working meticulously to best assist the families and victims, but it's a time-consuming and meticulous job.
I saved a very young child, about 4 years old, and an adult along with the firefighters, a mother and a father. At that moment, you don't choose who you help. You do your best to help.
Brazil's federal government has declared a state of calamity in Juiz de Fora, where officials say around 440 residents have been displaced. Flooding and landslips have also forced municipal schools to suspend classes. The country is in the height of its summer rainy season, from December to March, when intense storms often trigger landslides.
US President Donald Trump addressed tariffs in his State of the Union address, defending their economic impact while responding to a recent Supreme Court setback. A new 10% levy is now in effect, with the White House signaling a possible rise.
A new US 10% import charge took effect at midnight, replacing broader duties struck down by the Supreme Court last week. President Donald Trump has indicated he wants the rate raised to 15%, but no formal order has been issued, and Customs and Border Protection is enforcing the 10% rate for now. The earlier duties, ranging from 10 to 50%, had generated more than $175 billion in federal revenue, according to the Penn-Wharton budget model. Plaintiffs who challenged the previous measures have filed motions in lower courts seeking refunds. In his State of the Union, President Trump claimed his trade policies had driven economic gains, while criticizing last week's Supreme Court ruling that blocked his previous global import measures.
I used these tariffs, took in hundreds of billions of dollars to make great deals for our country, both economically and on a national security basis. Everything was working well. Countries that were ripping us off for decades are now paying us hundreds of billions of dollars. And then just 4 days ago, an unfortunate ruling from the United States Supreme Court. It just came down. It came down. Very unfortunate ruling. But the good news is that almost all countries and corporations want to keep the deal that they already made. Right, Scott?
Meanwhile, markets were cautious on Tuesday. Global stocks opened lower amid uncertainty over trade policy, though major US indexes later closed higher, with technology stocks leading gains.
The US will provide on-site passport services this week in Efrat, an Israeli settlement in the West Bank, marking the first time American consular officials have offered such assistance in the territory. The embassy says the move is part of efforts to reach American citizens abroad, including tens of thousands of dual US-Israeli nationals living in settlements. US officials say similar passport services will also be offered to American Palestinian dual nationals in the West Bank, including Ramallah. Most of the international community considers West Bank settlements illegal under international law, though Israel disputes this. Senior Iranian officials have signalled readiness to reach a nuclear agreement with the United States, describing the upcoming Geneva talks as a historic opportunity for a fair and equitable deal. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said diplomacy could really deliver quick results if political will exists on both sides. Tehran insists the negotiations focus solely on its nuclear program and the lifting of US sanctions. At the same time, Iranian officials warned that any military strike would trigger a regional response. The statements come as Washington reinforces its presence in the Middle East, deploying advanced fighter jets and carrier strike groups. Over to a quick break. When I return, I'll be joined by a guest to discuss Trump's State of the Union address and what that means in relation to the global political world. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for joining me this morning. Now, there's a lot to unpack on Trump's State of the Union address. He has spoken for over an hour and a half and broken the previous record of Bill Clinton's in 2000. He spoke on the US economy, tariffs, murder rates, along with many other issues. Now, here to help me unpack all of that is Associate Professor Orkhan Valiev, Head of Department in Kaiser University, who is currently in the US, Cleveland. Welcome to the program.
Great pleasure, thanks.
Great. Right. As I mentioned, so much has been said in his address, but I wanted to bring our attention first to what he said about Iran. Now, he says he wants to solve the problem through diplomacy, but also said that he was ready to act. Talks with Iran, we know, are scheduled for tomorrow in Geneva. How likely are we to reaching a deal with Iran? The US has said they do not want them to have nuclear weapons as well, which is quite a strong requirement. Do you think we'll get there?
As you know, it was the first, it was just the longest ever the State of Union that has been done by the President to the Congress. In comparison with Clinton's the speech, it was much more. Therefore, we can understand how it was the history because of his perspective. But however, before that, let me remind that last week, it was the historic moment in Washington D.C. The Trump's administration, was hosting the different kinds of leaders, the founding leaders of the Board of Peace. Which was established during the economic forum in Davos last year. So, including Azerbaijan president and prime ministers, and also the Minister of Foreign Affairs, they were in DC to attend the inauguration of the Board of Peace. This was another the issue. So the main issue, the main takeaways of the speech was just. Mostly based on economy, tariffs, immigration, foreign policy, and foreign policy was mostly based on the Iran issue. He said that I'm focused on diplomacy rather than some intervention. But however, clearly mentioned that his administration won't allow any kinds of developing a nuclear weapon in terms of the Iranian case. So it seems that yes, it will have some, how to say, just the strict the diplomatic meetings, negotiations between Iran and the United States. But however, his position was very clear that I would like to just solve the problems through the diplomacy. But however, we won't let to developing a nuclear weapon in terms of Iran.
Yes, and my question in that sense, obviously, it looks ahead to tomorrow's talks in Geneva. Do you think, obviously, Iran is also very much keen to have talks with the US in order for there not to be a conflict in the region? And obviously, we've seen a massive military build-up. What do you think is likely to happen?
Actually, over the last the period that we have seen the both sides' reaction to the process. we have at the same time the positive and negative reactions. But however, the Trump's the position was clear while delivering his speech to the Congress. Okay, I want diplomacy. It is the positive side, but the serious issue is that the Iran, from his perspective, Iran must be on the table and agree to stop developing the nuclear weapon that will facilitate reaching an agreement with the United States. But it's not easy to predict the situation, because not just in Iran, the situation is somehow uncertain. But the regional countries has different kinds of reaction. For example, Turkey, while his annual the press conference, the foreign minister Hakan Fidan said that Turkey's position is clear. Turkey doesn't want any kinds of intervention to Iran, and Iran's the stability will have the meaning to the establishment and keeping the stability in the region. So the situation is uncertain, and also the regional actors have different kinds of the position in that issue. But therefore, it's not easy to predict the future.
Turning to tariffs now, which he has called the Supreme Court's decision unfortunate, but is promoting his 15% global tariffs. How might some countries respond to this? Because currently, right now, a 10% levy is in place.
It seems that the tariffs somehow equal some economy. Just the Trump's administration believes that their position is much more better than in comparison with the previous administration in terms of inflation and many other issues. And also they couldn't have make an agreement with the court in terms of the tariff issues, any other issues, Supreme Court. So because they made a decision against his policies, therefore he just focused on the rising of the tariffs issue. This is another that could have the global the global conclusion for in terms of economy. But it seems that because of his the speech to the Congress, the States of the Union, his position is clear, like the Iranian issue, that because Trump's aimed to solve economic problem, that because he repeatedly mentioned that they inherited the let's say just the weak economy was from the previous administration. Therefore, it seems that solving this issue seems the main one of the main the key issues or takeaways within his the time in the office. Therefore, I don't think that he won't he will leave his position in that the issues that he wants to solve.
Right. Well, Trump also mentioned peace through strength and building the US military to be the most powerful on earth, along with suggesting that NATO also increase its defense. What message does that send?
Actually, he said that, yes, the military should was part of his speech as well. He just briefly he said that the military forces is one of the best one, so he's ready for any kinds of the defense of the country. So as you know, the perception of the NATO is different. Therefore, the United States during his the second time in the office has somehow this confrontation with the European allies, something like that. So maybe we can consider the establishment of the port of peace with that different issue and so on. So, but he said that the United States military forces are ready to defend the country in any times, in any conditions. So that he mentioned during his speech.
And what do you think his overall state of address tells us about his domestic and foreign policies? His foreign policy in his second time is clear that first is that he wants and aims to contribute to the establishment peace globally.
Therefore, he did many things over the last year. The Washington summit was one of them, and so on. And during his speech, the Iranian issue was the main the part of his speech, and also he mentioned the Venezuelan case and as well. But didn't say just much the clear about the Groenland issue that he mentioned, emphasized repeatedly over the last the months. But however, we haven't seen much during his speech to the Congress. So this is what just briefly his takeaways of his the foreign policy during the speech to Congress.
Well, thank you very much, Professor Aliyev, for talking us through that. Thank you again. Right, moving over now to other news in relation to the region. Now we'll take a look at some of these stories. The EU says Russia must withdraw from occupied territories, including Georgia, as part of the lasting peace settlement. A news correspondent in Tbilisi has more information.
The European Union is formally calling on Russia to withdraw its military forces from occupied territories, including those in Georgia, as part of its core conditions for achieving lasting peace on the continent. EU High Representative Kaja Kallas confirms that she has shared this position with the EU member states. She stated that Russia must respect its existing international obligations, which already require the withdrawal of troops from territories it occupies. According to Kallas, Russia is currently failing to comply with at least 30 such agreements. She specifically names Georgia and Moldova as countries where Russia has long-standing commitments to withdraw forces. The EU position also applies more broadly, including Russian military presence linked to the war in Ukraine, as well as deployments connected to security arrangements in Belarus and Armenia. Kallas acknowledges that some observers consider these demands difficult to achieve. She says directly that such requirements may sound unrealistic. However, she also states that Russia's own demands in negotiations are unrealistic, including attempts to secure territory through political pressure rather than military control. According to her, the EU's goal is to rebalance negotiations and focus on the core issue, Russia's continued military presence in neighboring states. For Georgia, this places its occupied territories firmly within the wider European security agenda. The issue of Russian troop withdrawal is now formally linked to discussions about ending the war in Ukraine and establishing long-term regional stability. The Georgian government says it would welcome any real progress. Georgian Dream member Irakli Kadagishvili stated that if international efforts lead to concrete steps toward the occupation, this would, of course, be positive for Georgia. But at the same time, he notes that it remains unclear what practical mechanisms will follow. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
A Turkish F-16 fighter jet has crashed in western Balıkesir province, killing the pilot, according to the country's National Defense Ministry. The aircraft took off from the 9th of May Jet Base Command shortly before 1 o'clock local time in the morning on Wednesday, today. But radio contact and tracking were lost soon after. Search and rescue teams were immediately deployed and the wreckage was later located. The ministry said the pilot was martyred and that a crash investigation team will determine the cause of the accident. Balıkesir's governor expressed condolences to the pilot's family, while the Justice Ministry confirmed the prosecutors have launched an official investigation, with senior officials arriving at the crash site. The 10th trilateral meeting for the Foreign Relations Committee of the Parliaments of Azerbaijan, Turkey and Georgia was held in Baku. Addressing the meeting, Turkey's Foreign Affairs Minister Fuat Oktay said peace and stability in the South Caucasus remain a priority for Turkey and voiced strong support for Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process. Participants also touched on regional connectivity projects and broader geopolitical developments, reaffirming their commitment to closer trilateral cooperation.
Immediate neighbors, new centers of power.
Pakistani and Afghan forces clashed along their border on Tuesday, each blaming the other for starting the deadly violence. It comes just days after Pakistani airstrikes killed at least 17 people inside Afghanistan around midnight on Saturday, according to officials. Over the weekend, Islamabad said its military killed around 70 militants in eastern Afghanistan. Afghan officials claim Pakistani troops fired first, while Pakistan blamed Afghan forces for unprovoked firing in Torkham and Tira. Nearly 3 million Afghans returned to the nation in 2025. Deportations from neighbouring countries drove many of the returns, according to a new report from the United Nations Refugee Agency. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
According to UNHCR's one-year recap report, 2.9 million Afghans returned to Afghanistan in 2025, including 1.9 million from Iran and 1 million from Pakistan. Deportations accounted for a large share of the total. Around 1.4 million people were forcibly returned, with 1.26 million from Iran and 155,000 from Pakistan. What is particularly striking is the profile of those returning. Many families had lived in neighboring countries for decades, and a large number of children were born outside Afghanistan. UNHCR says most did not leave voluntarily. 73% of returnees from Iran and 61% from Pakistan said they had no choice in returning. Inside Afghanistan, conditions remain extremely fragile. Post-return monitoring found 88% of households are in debt, 63% face food insecurity, and nearly half of children are out of school. Women and girls are described as particularly vulnerable, facing restrictions on movements and limited access to livelihoods. UNHCR says it has scaled up assistance, with nearly 700,000 people receiving protection support and close to 500,000 receiving cash assistance during 2025. But the agency warns that the scale of returns is placing enormous pressure on border facilities and communities of return. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Kazakhstan is stepping up efforts to study and protect the Caspian Sea as environmental pressure on the region continues to grow. Our correspondent reports from Almaty.
Kazakhstan has allocated $2.2 million to study and protect the Caspian Sea as environmental risks in the region continue to grow. The funding has been directed to the Kazakh Research Institute of the Caspian Sea. The money will be used to buy new equipment for marine monitoring and to upgrade laboratory facilities. This will allow scientists to move beyond limited studies and carry out regular on-site monitoring of the sea, tracking changes in weather conditions, marine life and water quality. Government officials say the investment will strengthen scientific capacity and improve understanding of what is happening in Kazakhstan's part of the Caspian Sea. This, in turn, is expected to support better and more effective environmental protection decisions. The institute focuses on major environmental challenges in the Caspian Sea, including the condition of fish stocks and the causes of seal death. Scientists are also studying changes in water levels, climate impacts, and overall water quality. The Caspian Sea is a unique ecosystem and one of the world's largest inland bodies of water. It plays an important role in regional biodiversity and economic stability. For Kazakhstan, its importance is especially high. The country has the longest Caspian coastline, stretching 2,320 kilometers, more than any other coastal state. At the same time, scientists warn that the sea level continues to fall. By 2050, it could reach minus 33 meters. A level of minus 28.5 meters is already considered critical, both for the ecosystem and for maritime economic activity. Fariza Kalimurtana, Almaty, A News.
Now, Sudan's war is intensifying, with Washington urging an immediate ceasefire to allow aid in. However, the army leadership is rejecting any truce and pushing ahead with its military campaign. Millions face displacement and hunger, raising fears of wider instability. A News' Naba Moeddin reports from Port Sudan.
Thanks, Guy. Actually, Washington is calling for a truce to allow humanitarian aid and protect civilians trapped in conflict zones in Sudan and in Sudan generally, as fighting is, of course, devastating an already dire situation and deepening the insecurity in the country. U.S. officials say the fighting in Sudan between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces not only impacting civilians, Guy, but also impacting wider regions and neighboring countries, including Chad, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Egypt, Libya, and South Sudan, and of course Central African Republic. So U.S. officials are calling for an urgent truce, but Sudan's Burhan, the army chief, the General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, is rejecting any negotiations with the RSF and any ceasefire under the current conditions, saying that there is no options but defeating the RSF due to what he described. And he said military operations will continue in various states in Sudan until RSF will be defeated. Of course, this situation means a lot of suffering. It will result in a lot of suffering for civilians trapped in war zones and civilians who aid cannot access them, including people in South Kordofan and people in Western Kordofan, and of course in Darfur, which is now fully controlled by the RSF. The situation in Sudan and the humanitarian crisis is deepening, and aid agencies say that people are reliant on humanitarian aid, and the humanitarian crisis is only worsening. More than 30 million people are in need of urgent food assistance in the country, and the escalation of fighting in various states is only worsening the situation. All of the U.S. And other regional and international blocs initiatives to end the fighting have so far failed. The two warring parties are conditioning some conditions before enrolling or involving in any negotiation talks, but U.S. officials are confirming that the only way to solve the situation, to end the fighting in Sudan, is negotiation tables. But in the current situation, we are only seeing the escalation of the fighting, which means for civilians, the deadlock and the political deadlock for civilians means the situation will, of course, complicate further before it will ease. More than 13 million people have been displaced and forced from their homes since the fighting began in April 2023, with more than 4 million people have, of course, seek refuge in neighboring countries. So all of the international pressure right now is needed to end the war in Sudan, and first of all to secure a sustainable humanitarian ceasefire.
It's now time for a break. When I come back, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages this morning. Stay with us. Good morning, you're watching Daybreak. If you're just joining me, I'm your host Nadia Jani, taking you through the day's top stories. Now let's take a look at the key headlines. US President Donald Trump delivers State of Union, highlighting immigration, economy and foreign policy. The UK government has agreed to release files related to the appointment of former Prince Andrew as trade envoy in 2001. And at least 25 people have died in heavy flooding and landslides in Brazil. Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to the Guardian website in regards to flooding. Now in Brazil, floods and landslides in Brazil kill at least 30 after record rainfall. Now some are reporting that it's around 25, but we know the number is going up, and on the Guardian it currently says 30. Now what has happened is, due to heavy rains, it has caused a number of places to overflood, especially within southeastern Brazil of the state Minas Gerais, after heavy rains came on Monday, causing flooding in certain areas. Now, officials say 18 people were killed, while another 7 deaths were reported in Uber, and rescue operations are currently ongoing. We do know that there is currently, as I mentioned, rescue teams out there, but most of the deaths were reported in a certain city. The city of Juiz de Fora is where a number of people, unfortunately, have died due to the flooding. Now, Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva sent his deepest condolences to the families of the victims and those who lost their homes due to the flooding, and added that the government would act with speed and force this moment requires in order to find people and to make sure that everyone is recovered and found. Now, the images of these landslides, as you can see, is depicted here on The Guardian, as well as a number of other media outlets across this morning. Great, we now go to our next headline making the rounds this morning, and that's on Al Jazeera, and that's in regards to Sudan, and at least 28 people killed as Sudan parliamentary force tears through Darfur. Now, Sudan's Rapid Support Forces, which is the RSF parliamentary group, has carried out a major raid in North Darfur state, killing and wounding dozens, including 10 women. Medical personnel were also among those attacked. Now, the assault on the area was in the Misharia area, which came against a backdrop of rising tribal tensions in the western region of Darfur. The United Nations investigation, which came out last week, found that the RSF has actually committed acts or pointed to acts of genocide against non-Arab ethnic groups. Now, there is a map here which I want to bring your attention to. So if we scroll all the way down, there's a map at the bottom, and it refers to what has been happening since the start of the war in Sudan since April 2023, and a number of drone attacks in certain areas where it's had the most drone attacks. So if we scroll all the way down to the bottom of the page, you'll be able to see exactly what I'm referring to, because in that it will state that since April 2023, there have been at least 3,017 deaths related to drone attacks in the area, most of them occurring in North Darfur, West Kordofan, and the North Kordofan area. Now, the town is home to an Arab tribal leader called Musa Hilal, but he has actually voiced his support for Sudan's current government in regards to that. So this map coming up here says drone attack deaths by region since April 2023. As I first mentioned, it's mostly in the North Darfur area. If it keeps coming up, there we are. We'll be able to see. And in that, it states the areas that have been hit aggressively when the war started in 2023, and that's exactly what I just wanted to pinpoint in this, so that you guys can see it from your screen. So there we are, North Darfur with the most, and then you've got North Kordofan and South and West Kordofan areas that have also been hit by the attacks, by the drone attacks there. Now, as I mentioned, the town is home to the Arab tribal leader, Musa Hilal, who said that he's voiced his support for the government. Now, also, just to put this into context, the war has killed now tens of thousands of people and displaced 11 million, creating the world's largest hunger and displacement crisis. So we'll definitely be keeping you up to date with all that's going there. The US has called for an immediate ceasefire so that aid can come into these areas, but both sides have said that a truce cannot be agreed at this moment, as fighting fighting continues in the area. We now move to our next headline, which is across a number of media outlets, and we go to A News, and it's in regards to Trump's State of the Union address today that he has just finished an hour or so ago. He says our nation is back in the longest ever State of Union speech. His speech was roughly an hour and 48 minutes, which makes it the longest for a president. The previous record breaker was Bill Clinton in 2000, when his state address was an hour and 29 minutes. We have some of the key lines about this. He talks about tariffs, he talks about the economy, he talks about foreign policy, especially looking at Iran and gas prices. And also makes an attack on the Somalian community there. Now we head over to our Washington correspondent, who has been marking this and taking key notes in regards to what was said. Here we go. Let's take a look at what he has to say.
At just under 2 hours long, it was the longest State of the Union speech by any American president in history. With a number of standing ovations from the Republicans, President Trump even had a bit of back and forth with some Democratic Party representatives who were heckling him. President Trump told them that they should be ashamed of themselves. Our nation is back stronger and better than ever, the president said, touting his economic accomplishments and lower prices for housing, mortgages, as well as lower prices in the supermarket and for groceries. Regarding Iran, President Trump said that Tehran has killed at least 32,000 protesters, shooting them and executing protesters by hanging. The president acknowledged that negotiations are continuing with Iran during his speech, and he said that he believed that the Iranian government wanted to make a deal, but however, President Trump said that he has not yet heard those words from Iran's leaders that they will never have a nuclear weapon. The president added that he would not allow the world's leading state sponsor of terror to obtain nuclear weapons. Too much applause during his State of the Union speech. President Trump said that he believed that Iran, according to his intelligence that he's received, is working to build ballistic missiles that could soon reach the United States. The president also awarded 3 Congressional Medal of Honors as the Commander-in-Chief. The Medal of Honor is the highest military decoration that can be awarded to a soldier. One of those medals was awarded to Eric Solver, who piloted a Chinook transport helicopter that took heavy damage during the operation to capture Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. He sustained serious injuries but survived during the military operation, and he managed to successfully pilot the transport helicopter through heavy enemy fire. Another key signature of President Trump's speech was his dedication to enforcing immigration law and ensuring that criminal illegal aliens are deported back to their home countries. Among the families that the president recognized during his State of the Union speech was the mother of Irina Zarutska, the young Ukrainian refugee who was murdered in Charlotte, North Carolina last year as she was returning home from work. President Trump used the moment to comfort Irina's family and to honor her life, while lambasting Democrats for supporting policies that President Trump said allowed the quick release of repeat felons. The president vowed that he would ensure justice for Irina and that the criminal repeat offenders remain behind bars so they may not be allowed the opportunity to kill again. Trump's speech was a big hit with Republican members of the House of Representatives and the Senate. He even autographed the tie of a representative as the president left the House chambers at the end of his speech. Mubi Shabander, A News, Washington.
The UK government has agreed to release files related to the appointment of former Prince Andrew as trade envoy in 2001. The move comes as lawmakers scrutinise his past links with US sex offender Jeffrey Epstein.
Today, we must begin to clean away that stain with the disinfectant of transparency.
Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, used an Opposition Day debate in the House of Commons on Tuesday to force the release of files on the former Prince Andrew's appointment as UK trade envoy in 2001.
Whether it is the President of the United States and his Commerce Secretary, or Peter Mandelson and Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, or Epstein himself. Their victims and survivors have seen those responsible evade accountability and escape justice for far too long.
His comments come after the arrest of Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor for suspicion of misconduct in public office last week. Andrew strenuously denies any wrongdoing. The UK government agreed these documents will be released after officials review them to ensure they don't jeopardise the police investigation.
We support this motion today. Frankly, it is the least we owe the victims of the horrific abuse that was perpetrated by Jeffrey Epstein and others. The abuse that was enabled, aided and abetted by a very extensive group of arrogant, entitled and often very wealthy individuals in this country and elsewhere.
Earlier this month, the House of Commons agreed to release documents on Lord Peter Mandelson's appointment as US ambassador after his links with Epstein were uncovered.
Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service has accused Britain and France of working with Kyiv to help it obtain nuclear weapons to strengthen its position in peace negotiations. The agency provided no evidence, and the claims were swiftly denied by Ukraine and France, with Paris calling them an outright lie. Britain has not immediately commented. Separately, Russia's foreign ministry warned of the risk of a direct military confrontation between nuclear powers and the potential grave consequences. The accusations come as Moscow demands Kyiv surrender the remaining part of the Donetsk region, a condition Ukraine has repeatedly rejected. The United States has imposed cyber-related sanctions on 4 individuals and 3 organizations. The entities are linked to Russia and the United Arab Emirates, the Treasury Department confirmed on Tuesday. The Treasury Department in the statement said the people were targeted for their acquisition and distribution of cyber tools harmful to US national security. More than 5 years after the Second Karabakh War of 2020 and more than 6 months after 8th of August breakthrough attained in Washington between Azerbaijan and Armenia, the regional order in the South Caucasus is undergoing visible transformation. One external actor whose influence appears to have diminished is Russia. The Kremlin's relations with the 3 South Caucasus states now warrant close and sober inspection. Joining me now is political analyst Dmitry Bridze in Russia. Hello and welcome to the programme.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation.
No problem. My first question is, how much strategic significance should we attach to relations between Russia and all 3 regional states?
Russian role in the Azerbaijani-Armenian peace process is no longer what it was in 2020 to 2022. As we know, Russia had a big influence on South Caucasus. And Moscow still matters, but it matters differently. Today, Russia is not the single manager of the process in the region, and it's one of the several external pillars competing and sometimes complementing each other alongside of the European Union and Turkey and the United States of America. As we know, the United States of America was the main actor in the region after the peace agreement that was signed between Azerbaijan and Armenia. So Russia, of course, it looks at the region as one of the important regions near to the Russian borders. And we know that Russia is trying to protect its borders from any influence of the United States and the Western countries. But at the same time, Russia understands that in this peace agreement, the President Trump played a big impact and role to sign this agreement. So, of course, now also the integration of Turkey in the region, it has a big impact because Turkey and Azerbaijan is partner countries in the initiatives in the region. But, of course, Russia is trying also to stabilize its relation with both Azerbaijan and Armenia in order to work on different projects in the region.
So last week, Russia's foreign ministry spokesperson publicly criticized remarks from Yerevan regarding Russian management of Armenia's railway system. What does that reaction tell us about Russia's position and influence there?
In my opinion, I think that, of course, Russia now is against the shift that's happening in the region in some points, because these changes that we see in the region it could be dangerous for the Russian interests and for Russian impact in the region, because Russia, as I said, it looks the country in the region as a very important region for its national interests. As we know, in the past also Russia tried to play different roles in the peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia from 2020 to 2022 but it failed to make a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And now, after the shifts that we see, and especially political shifts in Armenia and the new foreign policies of Armenia regarding to be more integrated into European Union initiatives, some politicians in Moscow sees as dangerous shifts for the Russian interest and for Russian national security regarding different initiatives, especially economical and trading that are initiated by Armenia.
Right. Well, some analysts also argue that there is a window now of opportunity for states to consolidate their sovereign positions, whilst Russia remains quite heavily preoccupied with the war in Ukraine. What's your view on that? Is that an opportunity for these sovereign states?
I think in my perspective, if we see the shifts that's happening in the region, and of course, the key turning point was the end of the Russian peacekeeping presence in Nagorno-Karabakh. Russian peacekeepers withdraw, and the joint ceasefire monitoring centers also shut down in 2022. It means that Russian impact on the region is less than it was before 2024. And of course, now in some points it was because Russia had more focus on the Ukrainian crisis and the Ukrainian front instead of looking at the situation in the South Caucasus and even in the Middle East, as we see also the political situation in the Middle East changed after 2024 and the situation that happened in Syria after the collapse of Assad regime, for example, because as we know, Assad regime was one of the regimes that were in alliance with Russia in the fighting of terrorism in the Middle East. But after these changes that happened in the Middle East and also, of course, in the South Caucasus, the situation totally changed for Russia, and it's because of the what called in Russia special military operation, because Russia from 2022 focused more on the situation on the Ukrainian front and what related to Ukraine because of the competition with the Western countries, and of course because of the sanctions that were implemented on the Russian economy from 2022 that had a big impact on the Russian foreign policies and of course on the trading relations with different countries in the region, if you're talking about South Caucasus, and of course with the European Union and the United States of America, because the sanctions played a big impact on the Russian foreign policies and strategies regarding its foreign relationship with different countries.
I see. Well, Armenia will hold this year its parliamentary elections in June for this summer, the next couple of months. Given Russia's visible frustration with Yerevan's diversification, do you anticipate any form of Russian soft power influence at all?
I think we won't see the soft power of Russia on the Armenian elections. Of course, now they're kind of new policies in Armenia regarding its relationship with the Russian Federation and the impact of the Russian soft power in the region, because some countries, even in the region, it's trying to change its policies regarding the relationship with Russia. And of course, Russia had a big impact on the region for centuries. But as we know that now the United States of America, the President Trump, after the peace agreement that was signed between Armenia and Azerbaijan, has more impact on the situation. We can say that now Russia has less impact on different domestic policies in Armenia or Azerbaijan or related to the region because of the political shifts that's happened after the peace agreement, and of course the political changes that happened in Armenia after the President Nikolo Pashinyan came to power.
And what do you think Russia's primary objective then is in the South Caucasus now?
I think Russia is still an important, of course, player, and of course country that it's in the region, is integrated to the region. If you're talking about different economical initiatives regarding the trade agreements, regarding the trade relationship with several countries, because still we don't forget that also China has a big impact on the region, on the trade agreements. And in BRICS, as we know, BRICS is also an important organization for economic relationship with several countries: China, India, Russia, Brazil, and other countries. And of course, the South Caucasus region countries. But as I said, now Russia changes its policies because of the Ukrainian crisis. And it changed actually from 2022, and now the Russian focus is mainly on the Ukrainian crisis. But if you're talking about trading relationship, it's still the main partners are the same. The post-Soviet Union countries are still working together in the different integration processes and trading agreements that were signed after the collapse of Soviet Union. And I think, in my opinion, that these agreements still exist, but the political situation in the region, if you're talking about South Caucasus, changed a little bit from what it was in the 4 or 5 years ago, because of the peace agreement and because of different initiatives from the Turkish side and from American side in order to make more cooperation between Armenia and Azerbaijan. And of course, it's changed the role of Russia, because in the past, Russia was a country that had worked on the peace processes more in the region and had more impact. Now, the Russian impact is less than it was before.
Yes, well, things definitely have changed, and relations between Baku and Moscow have visibly deteriorated following the Azerbaijan Airlines incident near Aktau in December 2024. In your view, then, what would be required to restore trust between the two nations?
I think it's more on the political level, and of course the policies that are changed in both of Russia and Azerbaijan. And in order to establish this relationship, the two leaders of the Azerbaijani president and the Russian president should work together on to establish this relationship, because as we know that the situation totally changed after the incident that happened. And of course, this incident played a negative impact on the relationship on both countries. So it's mainly the problems on the foreign policies and of course the different views on different situations that happened with two countries. And in order to establish this relationship, both countries should work on the diplomatic level, and of course diplomats should solve the situation based on finding solutions for the misunderstanding that happened.
I see. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Bridze, for explaining that and for coming onto the programme this morning. Thank you. At least 25 people have died in floods and landslides in Minas Gerais in Brazil. With rescue teams battling through thick mud, dozens remain missing as communities struggle to recover.
Thick red mud and debris is hampering rescue attempts after torrential rain swept through southeastern Brazil, killing at least 25 people on Monday, triggering flooding and landslides across the state of Minas Gerais. 18 of the deaths were recorded in the city of Juiz de Fora, while a further 7 were confirmed in the nearby town of Ubar, around 110 kilometers away. Authorities say 43 people are still missing. Fire officials say the scale of the damage is hampering access to the worst affected areas.
The biggest challenge is the area, which is very large. It includes 12 residences and a large number of residents who were inside their homes because it was raining at night. So we've been gathering these people to provide the best possible assistance, but the amount of mud is enormous. Therefore, we've been working meticulously to best assist the families and victims, but it's a time-consuming and meticulous job.
I saved a very young child, about 4 years old, and an adult along with the firefighters, a mother and a father. At that moment, you don't choose who you help. You do your best to help.
Brazil's federal government has declared a state of calamity in Juiz de Fora, where officials say around 440 residents have been displaced. Flooding and landslips have also forced municipal schools to suspend classes. The country is in the height of its summer rainy season, from December to March, when intense storms often trigger landslides.
Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was evacuated from his residence in Canberra on Tuesday night after a security threat. Mr. Albanese returned a few hours later after nothing suspicious was found. However, news outlet Guardian Australia was told the incident involved the threat of an explosive. Australian police gave very little detail but said that they responded to an alleged security incident and that there was no current threat to the public. US President Donald Trump addressed tariffs in the State of his Union address, defending their economic impact while responding to a recent Supreme Court setback. A new 10% levy is now in effect, with the White House signaling a possible rise.
A new US 10% import charge took effect at midnight, replacing broader duties struck down by the Supreme Court last week. President Donald Trump has indicated he wants the rate raised to 15%, but no formal order has been issued, and Customs and Border Protection is enforcing the 10% rate for now. The earlier duties, ranging from 10 to 50%, had generated more than $175 billion in federal revenue, according to the Penn-Wharton budget model. Plaintiffs who challenged the previous measures have filed motions in lower courts seeking refunds. In his State of the Union, President Trump claimed his trade policies had driven economic gains, while criticizing last week's Supreme Court ruling that blocked his previous global import measures.
I used these tariffs, took in hundreds of billions of dollars to make great deals for our country, both economically and on a national security basis. Everything was working well. Countries that were ripping us off for decades are now paying us hundreds of billions of dollars. And then just 4 days ago, an unfortunate ruling from the United States Supreme Court. It just came down. It came down. Very unfortunate ruling. But the good news is that almost all countries and corporations want to keep the deal that they already made. Right, Scott?
Meanwhile, markets were cautious on Tuesday. Global stocks opened lower amid uncertainty over trade policy, though major US indexes later closed higher, with technology stocks leading gains.
The US will provide on-site passport services this week in Efrat, an Israeli settlement in the West Bank, marking the first time American consular officials have offered such assistance in the territory. The embassy says the move is part of efforts to reach American citizens abroad, including tens of thousands of dual US-Israeli nationals living in settlements. US officials say similar passport services will also be offered to American Palestinian dual nationals in the West Bank, including in Ramallah. Most of the international community considers West Bank settlements illegal under international law, though Israel disputes this. Senior Iranian officials have signaled readiness to reach a nuclear agreement with the United States, describing the upcoming Geneva talks as a historic opportunity for a fair and equitable deal. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said diplomacy could deliver results quickly if political will exists on both sides. Tehran insists the negotiations focus solely on its nuclear program and the lifting of US sanctions. At the same time, Iranian officials warned that any military strike would trigger a regional response. The statements come as Washington reinforces its presence in the Middle East, deploying advanced fighter jets and carrier strike groups. A Turkish F-16 fighter jet has crashed in the western Balıkesir province, killing the pilot, according to the country's National Defense Ministry. The aircraft took off from the 9th Main Jet Base Command shortly before 1 a.m. local time this morning. But radio contact and tracking were lost soon after. Search and rescue teams were immediately deployed and wreckage was later located. The ministry said the pilot was martyred and that a crash investigation team will determine the cause of the accident. Balıkesir's governor expressed condolences to the pilot's family, while the Justice Ministry confirmed that prosecutors have launched an official investigation, with senior officials arriving at the crash site. You're watching Daybreak on A News. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak with me, Nadia Jani. Now let's turn to Europe. And German Chancellor Friedrich Merz has landed in Beijing for his inaugural trip to China. It comes in the middle of a growing trade imbalance between the two countries that Merz is keen to stabilise. Our correspondent Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe as Friedrich Merz makes his first visit to China as German Chancellor. Facing pressure from both Beijing's industrial muscle and U.S. President Trump's tariffs on European exports, Merz is anxious to reset relations and tackle issues such as overcapacity, unfair subsidies, and export restrictions squeezing German industry. China, once the key driver of German export growth, is now seen in Berlin as both indispensable and an existential competitive threat, with German exports to China falling sharply and domestic industries like autos and steel shedding tens of thousands of jobs under pressure from cheap Chinese EVs and steel redirected from the U.S. to Europe following Trump's tariffs. In Beijing, Merz will meet Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang, visit German flagship sites including a Mercedes-Benz EV plant and a Siemens Energy facility. He'll try to clinch several economic deals while pressing Beijing to rein in industrial overcapacity and level the playing field for foreign firms. It's important to note that as Chancellor, Merz chose India for his first Asian trip, signaling a push to diversify Germany's economic dependencies. Alongside other EU member states, Germany seeks to strengthen partnerships with countries around the world amid growing tensions with the U.S. and security concerns arising from the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Merz is even more open now to targeted buy European-style measures and an industrial accelerator act that would tie subsidies to European content if China does not address distortive practices. Now, for Germany and the EU, the trip is a test of whether Merz can keep access to China's market and supply chains while signaling that Europe is ready to harden its trade defense if Beijing keeps flooding global markets with subsidized goods. All this as transatlantic tensions over Trump-era tariffs complicate the bloc's room to maneuver. For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now, before we get to our last story, I just wanted to say that Caraba played Newcastle yesterday evening in the UK, and the score was 3-2. It was very tight. It was a very close score, and our correspondent Katie was there yesterday, and you'll be able to get an update from her very shortly. But well done, Caraba. Even though they lost that particular match, it was a good game. It was very tight, but good luck and well done to the boys in the football team. Now, something a little bit more colourful for your screens. Hindus in the northern town of Barsana in India are celebrating a sacred tradition called Laddu Holi. It's an age-old custom where priests shower laddus, which are sphere-shaped sweets, upon the crowd, symbolising divine blessings, abundance and shared joy. The festival is a mark of love and devotion and playfulness between deities Radha and Krishna. The vibrant colours represent the triumph of good over evil, the arrival of spring and the breakdown of social barriers.
I am feeling immense joy. Laddu Holi is a festival. It is happiness. It is the blessing of Radha Rani that she has called us here and given us the opportunity to take part in Laddu Holi today. We have come from Haridwar and we have brought about 1 1/4 quintal of laddus, prepared and packed to offer here.
Colourful indeed. Well, thank you for joining me this morning and for going through the top stories today. Make sure you stay connected to A News for further updates, and I'll see you back here tomorrow morning. Take care.